Hi everyone, we are from Group 13 and our topic is learning theories in cognitivism and constructivism. My name is Prisha.
My name is Amani.
My name is Aisha.
My name is Iman.
And my name is Pravina.
So we will start with the introduction first.
Okay, for the introduction, our learning theories is to compare the study of cognitivism and constructivism. So, to start, we need to understand the two major educational theories that shape how we design effective lessons, which is cognitivism and constructivism. First, cognitivism focuses primarily on how the human mind receives, organizes, stores, and retrieves information. It views the brain a bit like an information processing center. The core emphasis here is on presenting facts as clearly and as logically as you can, using structures that optimizes memory and deep thinking. In contrast, constructivism takes a different path. It focuses on how students actively construct their own unique understanding through hands-on experience, problem solving, and collaboration with peers. Next. So as you can see, these are the differences and the definition that I have stated earlier. So instead of just for constructivism, instead of just listening passively to an instructor, students learn through active participation and building meaning from what they experience. Now, for the next slide, I will continue with the first question. No, the importance of the learning theories. Next. Okay, the importance. Why is it crucial for educators to understand these learning theories? They are not just abstract ideas from textbooks, they serve as practical guides. On one hand, they help teachers carefully select methods that suit diverse student backgrounds, abilities, and learning styles. When teachers understand these models, they can see how instructional design directly impacts students' memory, engagement, and critical thinking skills. On the other hand, applying these theories makes our lesson more targeted and meaningful. It broadens our perspective as educators, reminding us that not everyone learns the same way, and allowing us to properly cater to the needs of different student groups in classrooms. So, for the first question of the first situation. Next. Okay. The first question. Let's look at how this applies directly to our first classroom scenario, which is Miss Taylor's science lesson. First, looking at the teacher's role, Miss Taylor acts as the main source and organizer of information. She uses tools like slideshows and graphic organizers to structure complex data so students can easily encode and store it into their long-term memory. Second point, regarding the learner's role, students function as active processors of information rather than just passive listeners. They build personal mental frameworks and use tools like mnemonics to tie new knowledge back to what they already know. And finally, through practice and retrieval, Miss Taylor uses repetition, flashcards, and quick quizzes to check for understanding and optimal storage and long-term recall of the content. And now for the second question, as to what are the elements that indicates that this situation is cognitive theory. Next. For the next question, there are three elements that can be seen from the situation that gives off that it is a cognitive theory. So to break down these specific mechanisms, we can look at these 3 points. First, structuring and encoding. So structure and encoding, it involves diagrams and graphic organizers that are used to chunk information. This helps manage the student's cognitive load and smoothly transfers data from working memory into long-term memory storage. Second, elaboration. The lesson requires students to invent their own mnemonics. This forces them to bridge brand new and complex terminologies with their existing knowledge base, resulting in a much deeper and more durable understanding. And for the last point, the last element that we could see is retrieval practice. By incorporating frequent questionings, quizzes, and flashcards, the lesson provides the necessary repetition to secure long term memory recall and make knowledge readily accessible for students when they need it. That is all from me.
So now we will go to question 3.
So question 3, situation 1, which is the cognitivism by Mrs. Taylor. So point 1 is attention. So students are not just sitting there zoning out, right? They're actually focusing on the diagrams and slideshow. And that's how info gets in their brain, their mind. First into sensory memory and then working memory, because where it actually gets processed. And second, uh, use prior knowledge, which is they also link new stuff about the brain to what they already know. Like you must ever notice it's easier to learn something new when it connects to something you already understand, right? Same concept here. So mnemonics. Then there's mnemonics. Students like to make up their own tricks to remember stuff, like linking cerebellum to bell and picturing a tightrope walker, since cerebellum controls balance. So funny enough, these silly tricks actually helps info stick way better than just repeating facts over and over. So explaining brain functions. So Ms. Taylor also makes students explain brain functions in their own words, not just repeat what's on the slide, but actually explain it in detail. So that forces them to really process it and not just memorize it blindly. Okay, the third point is quiz and flashcards. And then quiz plus flashcard. This isn't just tasting, it's a retrieval practice. Basically forcing your brain to pull into info back out, uh, which makes it stick even more. So overall, at the end of the day, it all comes back to three things: attentions, encoding, retrieval, and students are not just passively receiving info; they are actually part of the whole learning process. And next slide. Okay. So basically, Miss Taylor's role here is she's not just throwing facts at us to memorize. She's actually plans the lesson so we can process the info properly. So point number 1 is visual aids. Like if she just talk about the brain without any pictures, we had probably lost most of it. So she uses diagrams and slideshows to keep us focused without overwhelming the students or without overwhelming us. And then the second is graphic organizer. She also uses a graphic organizer to compare the brain parts because this helps move stuff from our working memory into long-term memory. So it's easier for our brain to connect ideas and it's much easier to remember. And then the third is frequent pausing. Okay. Then Miss Taylor keep pausing to check if the students are following right. So that way she can catch confusion early before it messes up the next thing we learn. So this is basically uh, Pyget's idea. So we adjust what we already know to fit new info. So the fourth one is quiz and flashcards. Um, Okay, so Miss Taylor doing quiz and flashcards at home. This is reseal and retrieval, so we don't forget what we learned and can recall it easier. So Miss Taylor helps the students to make a practice at home by using quiz and flashcards. So overall, everything Mrs. Taylor does shows how a teacher's role works in cognitivism, and it's helping a student to process, store, and recall the info properly. And that's all for my part. Moving to the next part.
Okay, next I will be explaining about question 5, which is about how prior knowledge and experience are used in constructing new understanding based on situation 1, which follows the cognitivism theory. In this situation, students connect new information with what they already know. This helps them understand and basically remember the lesson more effectively. For example, Miss Taylor asks students to create mnemonics, which are memory techniques that make the functions of the brain easier to remember. She also uses graphic organizers to help students organize and compare information. Besides that, students explain the concepts in their own words, explaining them to process the information more deeply. The lesson ends with quizzes and flashcards, which reinforce what they have learned. Overall, this situation shows that learning becomes more meaningful when students connect new knowledge with their existing knowledge. And that's all for question 5. I'll go to question 6. And question 6 is about age, gender, and ability to learn. Firstly, the lesson is suitable for grade 7 students because it matches their cognitive development. Activities such as diagrams, mnemonics, and quizzes help students improve their memory and understanding. Secondly, gender does not affect a student's ability to learn. Both boys and girls have equal opportunities to participate, and their success depends on their motivation, prior knowledge, and effective teaching methods. Lastly, students have different learning abilities. So, Miss Taylor uses a variety of teaching strategies such as visual diagrams, questioning, mnemonics, and quizzes. These methods support different learning styles and help all students learn effectively. In conclusion, this situation shows that effective teaching strategies and prior knowledge influence learning more than gender, while age helps determine the most suitable learning activities. Thank you, and that's all from me. Let's move on to the next part, which is situation 2.
Now, moving on to the second situation, which is regarding constructivism. Now, before we going to answer the questions, let's recall back what is the theory of constructivism in education. See, the theory of constructivism proposes that students build their own understanding and knowledge based on their own already having knowledge to deepen their understanding based on different topics. Now, for instance, this situation is regarding Mr. David teaching students about history, about in mean in colonial resistance movements. Now, we look into the first question, constructivism. So, in this question, the question asks about what is the theory that is related to the situation. Now, of course, I've already answered that, which is constructivism. Now we look into the teacher's role in constructivism. See, the teacher only acts as the facilitator rather than simply providing information or lecturing. At the same time, the lecturer or the teacher presents students with real world challenges related to colonial resistance because we are referring to the situation. Now, at the same time, the teacher also encourages the students to think critically and explore ideas while also at the same time to solve their own problems. Now, in the entire process, the teacher also guides the students to research every and any historical examples that they can use in their own understanding. Now, they also allow students to develop and justify their own answers. Now, next, we look into the students' role. See, students are active participants in their own learning rather than passive receivers of information. Instead of just listening to lectures, they build their own understanding. Now, students research, they analyze, they discuss, and they collaborate with their classmates in order to come up with the most adequate answer. See, they use their own knowledge and new information or old information to develop their answers. And obviously, they work together to solve the problems and make decisions. And in the end, they justify their own ideas using the evidence and historical reasoning. And at the end, they will also develop skills such as critical thinking, problem solving, decision making, and collaboration with their classmates. And then we look into the entire learning process. See, the learning in constructivism takes place through exploration, inquiry, problem solving, and reflection rather than memorization, which is only through students. Students also apply their own knowledge, old or new, to an authentic real world situation, which is, in this situation, historical or colonial resistance movements. They construct new knowledge by connecting new information with their previous experiences and understanding. The process involves research, collaboration, experience, and reflection, while in the end, the teacher will look into or reflect based on what everybody has already collaborated and come up with the answer. Next, we look into the second question. Next. Now, the second question is related to the elements involved in the situation. Now, first of all, the situation mainly focuses on student-centered learning. See, students takes their own responsibility for their own learning, which is where they build their own understanding. And obviously, the teacher only acts as facilitator. Students also independently research information and evaluate evidence to construct their own answers. And in the end, they make decisions and effective based on the situation resistance strategies. The second element is collaborative learning. See, students work together in a group throughout the lesson to come up with the best possible resistance strategies. Obviously, they exchange ideas between one another and they discuss different perspectives and share their own knowledge because different people have different prior experiences and different knowledge. Students also obviously develop communication, teamwork, and problem solving skills. Now, the third element, last but not least, is authentic learning and reflection. See, students are placed in a realistic historical situation about colonial resistance movements. See, they apply their own knowledge to solve an authentic problem that may or may not happen in the real world. Also, at the same time, in the end of the lesson, reflection helps students to evaluate their reasoning and deepen their understanding of the topic, specifically in this situation about colonial resistance movements. Now, that's all for me. Let's move on to the third question.
Good morning, madam. I will be continuing my part, which is situation 2, question 3 and 4. As for question 3, in this activity, students are actively involved in their own learning because they are not just listening to the teacher or memorizing historical facts. Instead, they explore, analyze, and construct their own understanding of history. Firstly, the students research a real-world historical problem by imagining themselves as a member of a resistance movement. Through this process, they develop their knowledge by conducting research, collaborating with their group members, solving problems, and also reflecting on their learning. Next, the students get to discuss their ideas, consider different perspectives, and work together to make a decisions. This collaborative process encourages them to think critically and learn from one another. After that, students apply what they have learned by participating in a role play, where they take on the roles of people living under colonial rule and respond to different situations introduced by Mr. David. Now, let's move on to question 4. As for question 4, Mr. David's role is that of a facilitator, a guide, and a scaffold, rather than a traditional teacher who simply delivers the information to their students. This teaching approach is based on Vygotsky's social constructivism, which emphasizes that students learn best through social interaction and collaboration. Instead of providing students with all the answers, Mr. David encourages them to research independently, work together in groups, develop their own resistance strategies. This allows the students to take ownership of their own learning and construct their own understanding. Throughout the activity, he also provides scaffolding by asking open-ended questions instead of just giving them a direct answer. These questions guide the students' thinking, encourage them to justify their ideas, and help them to consider different perspectives. And finally, Mr. David also supports students within Vygotsky's Zone of Proximal Development or ZPD by providing guidance only when needed. As a result, students are able to build their knowledge through experience, discussion, and collaboration, while becoming more confident and independent learners. However, what is the zone of proximal development or ZPD? That I will explain in the next slide. As you can see in the slide, there are three circles. The big circle is out of reach, which represents what the student cannot do even with the teacher's assistance. The second circle, which is the zone of proximal development, ZPD, is what the students can do with the assistance of others or scaffolding. And the last circle, the inner circle, which is the current understanding, it represents what the student can do independently without any help whatsoever. That is all for me.
For the question 5 is based on constructivism because students are building new knowledge using what they already know. So in this activity, they use their previous history lessons, research and personal experiences to create strategies for colonial resistance. Instead of just memorizing the facts, they connect with new information with existing knowledge. For example, they use real life historical events like Indian independence or the Algerian resistance to help them to understand the topic even more better. So when they reflect on the role play, they connect with what they learn to real life history. This makes the lesson more meaningful and helps them to remember better. And when during the exam times, it's really helpful for them to recall what they studied in the previous lessons. Next. So for the last one, which is question 6 in situation 2. So this question is related to cognitivism because it focuses on how students think and learn. So at the first place, age plays a role because uh, these students are aged around 15 to 16 years old. So they can think more deeply and understand complex topics like colonization. So moving to the second point, which is gender. Gender does not affect a person's intelligence or ability to learn. However, having both girls and boys in a group can bring a different ideas and perspective during the discussions. So, lastly, students have different learning abilities. Some are better at researching, while others are better at presenting or acting. Group work like this allows students or everyone to contribute based on their strengths, so all students can learn effectively. So that's all for my part. So that's
Thank
the
you, everyone.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, madam.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you, madam.
Thank you.
I love you, madam. Thank you, madam.